A racist flight attendant forced a black family to leave their first-class seats, believing she was teaching them a lesson. However, when the plane landed, a shocking truth forced her to face the consequences of her decision. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel to join us for thrilling stories you won't want to miss. Alice Parker, a flight attendant with 15 years of experience at Skylux Airlines, was always known for her professional demeanor and firm attitude. However, this very confidence led her to make an unforgivable mistake on the fateful flight 512 that evening. On flight 512 from New York to Paris, Alice stood at the boarding gate, her sharp eyes scanning the passengers waiting to board. She was used to quickly assessing each individual, from demanding customers to those simply wanting a smooth flight, but this time her gaze lingered longer when she saw a family, the Lewis family. Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Vivian, and their two young children, a boy and a girl, appeared calm and polite. Daniel wore a simple yet well-fitted navy suit, while Vivian chose an elegant long dress. The children stood quietly by their parents, causing no disturbance. Everything about them exuded refinement, yet their presence felt oddly unsettling to Alice. It wasn't their clothing or behavior that unsettled her, but something Alice couldn't quite name. When she glanced at the first-class tickets in their hands, she wondered how could they afford to be here. From that moment, Alice allowed her unconscious biases to take over. She flashed a professional but insincere smile. Would you please step aside for a moment while we recheck your tickets? Alice gestured toward a nearby assistance counter. Daniel frowned slightly, his gaze sharp, but his voice calm. Is there a problem with our tickets? Oh no, not at all, sir, Alice replied quickly, her hands moving across the keyboard, but her eyes, though she tried to hide it, betrayed a hint of suspicion. It's just that occasionally the system encounters issues while scanning tickets. Daniel kept his steady gaze on Alice, his voice firm. If the system has an issue, I trust you'll resolve it, but I also hope we'll be treated fairly. Alice hesitated briefly at his remark, but quickly masked her discomfort. After a few minutes of checking, Alice reluctantly returned their tickets, though with an unexplainable sense of dissatisfaction. As they passed through, Alice turned to her colleague Mia Harper just as the Lewis family stepped into the first-class cabin. Mia, don't you think there's something unusual about them? Alice asked in a low voice, as though afraid someone might overhear. Mia glanced at Alice, her brows furrowing slightly. Unusual? They seem polite. Their tickets are valid. What do you mean? Alice hesitated, but her eyes remained fixed on the first-class door where the Lewis family had just entered. I don't know, but I just feel like they don't belong there. Mia raised an eyebrow, her tone tinged with irritation. Alice, they have first-class tickets. Don't you think you're overthinking this? Alice forced an awkward smile, trying to brush off her unease. Maybe I am, but sometimes intuition proves me right. Mia sighed, shaking her head. Intuition or prejudice? Alice, I think we should focus on serving passengers, not judging them based on personal feelings. Alice didn't respond, but deep down the thought that the Lewis family didn't belong in first class continued to haunt her throughout the evening. Mia, who had only been with Skylux for a few years, shrugged. They seem fine to me. Alice, their tickets are valid. Alice remained silent in her mind. The belief that the Lewis family didn't fit into the first-class cabin, a space she deemed reserved for worthy passengers, lingered, and so their journey on Flight 512 began with an injustice the Lewis family could never have anticipated. Alice continued to watch the Lewis family as they passed through the boarding gate, although the system had confirmed their first-class tickets were valid. An uneasy feeling lingered in her chest. Mia, what do you think about that? Family. Alice turned to her colleague, standing nearby, her voice lowered as if afraid someone might overhear. Mia glanced briefly at the Lewis family, her eyes filled with surprise at the question. They seemed perfectly normal. Alice, polite and with valid tickets. Why? Alice shrugged, but her eyes never left the Lewis family as they walked away. I don't know, I just feel like they don't belong here. Mia frowned, her voice calm but laced with subtle irritation. Alice, we shouldn't judge passengers based on a feeling. Alice didn't respond, yet the uneasiness in her heart only grew stronger when the Lewis family reached the first-class section. Alice stepped ahead of them. She smiled politely, but her tone remained authoritative. Daniel turned to look at Vivian, both noticing something unusual but choosing to remain silent. Daniel calmly handed over their tickets, his voice steady. I believe everything was already confirmed earlier. Alice quickly reviewed the tickets again, though she knew the system was flawless. After a few seconds, she forced an awkward smile. Yes, your tickets are valid, however, there's been a slight change in seating. I'll move your family to seats further back. There's still first-class seats, but this section will be more comfortable for families with children. Without waiting for a response, Alice swiftly reprinted the tickets and directed them to seats near the back of the first-class cabin, right next to the restrooms and far from the best amenities. Vivian glanced at Daniel, her eyes reflecting her discomfort, but Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his wife's shoulder. As a silent reminder, it's fine, he said softly, let them prove themselves. Alice felt a vague sense of satisfaction as the Lewis family moved to the less desirable seats. They belonged there, she thought, continuing her work with an outward air of confidence. At the customer service desk, Mia Harper, a newer flight attendant, stood quietly observing the situation. Mia could sense the injustice in Alice's treatment of the Lewis family. When Alice returned, Mia carefully chose her words, speaking gently. Alice, I think that family has first-class tickets. Shouldn't we treat them like any other passengers? Alice paused, looking at Mia with slight irritation. Mia, when you've been in this business long enough, you develop a kind of intuition. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Sometimes small adjustments are necessary to maintain harmony in the first-class cabin. Mia wanted to say more, but the sharp look in Alice's eyes made her hold her tongue. Mia knew further argument wouldn't change Alice's perspective, but the dissatisfaction in her own eyes was evident. Alice failed to recognize that her action stemmed not just from professionalism but from deeply ingrained biases. Alice avoided making eye contact with the Lewis family, but deep down she recognized that her action stemmed from old wounds. When she was 12 years old, she had been rejected from a student club for not meeting the qualifications set by the organizers. She had stood outside the closed door, peeking through the small window at other kids laughing and playing inside, feeling as though she had been pushed out of a world she thought she belonged to. She could never forget the cold words of the teacher, "Sorry, you're not the right fit for us." Those words had sunk deep into her mind, leaving a psychological scar that caused her to unconsciously carry a belief that everything had a hierarchy. Looking at the Lewis family, a thought flickered through Alice's mind: do they truly belong in this first-class cabin, or are they taking the place of those who deserve it? This thought made Alice feel an inexplicable discomfort, as though their presence reminded her of the injustice she had once endured. But instead of admitting this to herself, she buried her emotions under a professional facade, using her work as an excuse to justify her behavior. As she began serving drinks, Alice walked past the Lewis family's row without stopping. Daniel and Vivian remained calm and refrained from making any additional requests. However, their young daughter, Ellie, tugged gently on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, I'm thirsty." Vivian pressed the call button, hoping this simple request would be quickly fulfilled. Alice noticed the signal light from their seat. Instead of responding immediately, she chose to serve other passengers first. They can wait, she thought, rationalizing her actions by convincing herself that the other passengers were more important. When Alice finally approached their row, her demeanor lacked enthusiasm. "What do you need?" she asked curtly. Vivian smiled politely, masking her disappointment. "We just need a glass of water for my daughter." "Thank you." Alice nodded and quickly walked away, but she didn't bring the water right away. Instead, she continued chatting with another passenger, leaving the Lewis family waiting for several minutes. When she eventually brought the water, Daniel simply said, "Thank you." His tone was calm but watchful. As Alice continued serving meals, the disparity in her treatment of passengers became increasingly evident. "Mr. Reed, here's the salmon you requested," Alice said sweetly, bending down with a smile as she carefully placed the tray in front of the middle-aged man. "I hope you enjoy it. If you need anything else, just press the call button." The man nodded, pleased. "Thank you, Alice. Skylux's service always impresses me." However, when Alice reached the Lewis family's row, her attitude shifted dramatically. She placed their meal trays on their table without making eye contact. "Here's your meal," she said bluntly, her tone cold. Vivian glanced up, maintaining a polite smile. "Thank you, but I believe this isn't what we ordered. We requested the vegetarian menu." Alice frowned, irritation flashing across her face. "I'll check, but I'm fairly certain this is the correct order." Daniel exchanged a quick look with Vivian, his expression hinting at concern. "It's fine, Vivian. We can manage." Alice lingered for a moment but, instead of double-checking, turned and walked away without offering further explanation. Her behavior did not go unnoticed by other passengers, creating an increasingly tense atmosphere in the cabin. In contrast, the Lewis family remained composed. Vivian and Daniel exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. In that glance was a shared empathy, a reminder that this was not the first time they had encountered such unfair treatment. It wasn't that they didn't notice, it was that they chose not to react. They had learned to maintain their dignity even though moments like these stirred turbulent emotions within them. Meanwhile, Alice felt a strange and inexplicable discomfort. The Lewis family had done nothing wrong. They weren't loud, they didn't complain, and they were even more courteous than many other passengers she had served. Yet their calm demeanor felt like a thorn in Alice's side. "Why don't they complain?" she thought. "Are they trying to act better than the rest of us? Or do they think their silence will make me feel guilty?" These thoughts swirled in Alice's mind, making her feel as though she was being challenged. However, what she refused to acknowledge was the creeping guilt slowly taking root within her, a guilt she had been suppressing since the moment she reassigned their seats. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavy. A few observant passengers began to notice the disparity in Alice's treatment of the Lewis family. An elderly woman glanced toward their table, her eyes reflecting a mix of surprise and quiet disapproval. A couple seated nearby whispered to each other but chose not to speak out. Nevertheless, their silence felt like a quiet accusation directed squarely at Alice, increasing her discomfort. Alice tried to avoid these glances, convincing herself that she was simply doing her job. But deep down, she couldn't deny the truth. The Lewis family wasn't the issue, it was her. Her unconscious biases and unspoken insecurities had created this unjust atmosphere. Amid the unspoken tension, a sudden cry rang out from the front rows. An elderly passenger collapsed, clutching his chest, his face pale. Alice froze for a moment, trying to regain her composure as she hurried over to assess the situation. "Is there a doctor on board?" she called out, her voice trembling with urgency. Daniel immediately stood up. "I'm a doctor," he said, his voice calm yet firm. Alice stood rooted to the spot as Daniel stepped forward with professionalism and poise. He quickly examined the man and issued clear instructions to other flight attendants to retrieve the emergency medical kit. Once the passenger's condition was stabilized, another alarm blared throughout the cabin. The cabin pressure warning light suddenly illuminated, throwing the first-class section into a state of chaos. Alice, usually confident in her work, now found herself flustered in the face of back-to-back crises. Some passengers began to panic, fearing the possibility of an emergency landing. While Alice was still trying to calm the situation, Daniel stepped forward again, calm and composed. Cabin pressure could spiral out of control if not addressed promptly, he explained. We need to quickly secure oxygen masks and ensure everyone remains calm. Alice watched in astonishment as Daniel not only managed his own family's safety but also helped other passengers around him, instructing them on how to properly use their oxygen masks. Vivian, too, stepped up, comforting a frightened elderly woman who was crying in fear. You need to notify the captain immediately, Daniel reminded Alice, his tone steady yet firm, and let us know as soon as there's information about an emergency landing. Alice followed his instructions silently, feeling a profound shift within herself. Daniel's professionalism and composure starkly contrasted with the prejudices she had harbored toward his family from the start of the flight. Vivian wasn't idle either. She comforted the relative of the panicked passenger, keeping everyone calm. Their children, Ellie and Liam, sat quietly, watching their parents with pride. Within minutes, Daniel stabilized the passenger's condition. He turned to Alice and said, I've done my part. Now you need to inform the pilot to prepare for an emergency landing if necessary. Alice could only nod, speechless. Daniel's professionalism and composure, starkly contrasting with the unfair treatment she had shown, made her feel small. After the emergency, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted. Other passengers, having witnessed the Lewis family's calm and kindness, began showing them clear respect. Alice felt the eyes of the passengers on her, some even openly displaying their disappointment. As Alice stepped into the galley to prepare drinks, Mia approached her. Alice, I think you need to reconsider how you've been treating that family, Mia said softly but firmly. Alice didn't reply, continuing her work, but deep down, what had just happened shook her confidence. The Lewis family had not only risen above every challenge with dignity, but also highlighted Alice's unconscious bias, something she could no longer ignore. In the first-class cabin, the heavy atmosphere wasn't due to anything the Lewis family had done, but rather Alice's obvious favoritism among the passengers. Watching closely was Michael Reed, a middle-aged businessman, quietly observant by nature. He had taken note of every one of Alice's actions, from her deliberate delays in serving the family to the way she placed their meal trays with indifference. Nothing escaped Michael's sharp eyes. Michael noticed that every time Alice passed the Lewis family's seats, she seemed to avoid making direct eye contact. In contrast with other passengers, she smiled warmly, inquired politely, and sometimes acted overly friendly. Meanwhile, the Lewis family remained calm and composed, focusing on their meal or tending to their children. Their silence, however, did not obscure the blatant attitude Alice displayed. Setting down his glass of wine, Michael's eyes followed Alice as she laughed and chatted with another passenger nearby. He leaned back in his seat thoughtfully, weighing his options. What is she trying to do, he wondered. Not one to interfere in others' affairs, this time the evident injustice unsettled him. As Alice passed by again, Michael decided he couldn't remain silent. He sat up straight and raised his hand slightly. Miss Parker, may I have a word? His voice was deep and firm, drawing not only Alice's attention but also that of a few other passengers. Alice turned, her professional smile flickering, but her hesitation was evident. Yes, Mr. Reed. How can I assist you? Michael looked directly at her, his gaze calm but piercing. I've noticed that the family in the last row of first class hasn't received the same level of service as the other passengers. Is there an issue, or was that just an oversight? The question sounded polite, but Michael's tone carried an implicit challenge. Alice froze momentarily but quickly regained her composure. Oh, there's no issue, Mr. Reed. We've just had a slight service hiccup, and I'll ensure that family is properly taken care of right away. Michael didn't miss the flicker of tension in her eyes. Tilting his head slightly, he gave a faint smile. I hope so, he said slowly, because they've paid for first-class service just like all of us here. His comment felt like a spotlight exposing Alice. She nodded lightly. Of course, Mr. Reed. I'll take care of it immediately. With that, she quickly walked away, attempting to appear busy, but inside, Alice felt the pressure mounting. Michael returned to his seat, his gaze tracking Alice's movements throughout the first-class cabin. Although he said nothing further, his calm demeanor and sharp gaze served as a silent reminder that he was watching, unsettling Alice even more. She hurried into the galley, gripping a tray tightly. The constant scrutiny from Michael and the silent dignity of the Lewis family made it hard for her to focus. Why is he interfering, she thought, irritated. But at the same time, a small voice in her mind whispered, because he's right. The combined pressure from Michael's gaze, the Lewis family's silence, and the judgmental looks from other passengers created an undercurrent of tension, pushing Alice to the brink of the confidence she had always prided herself on. What she didn't yet realize was that this was just the beginning of what lay ahead. Flight 512 landed in Paris under the soft glow of the evening sun, carrying weary but satisfied passengers except for one. Alice Parker. During the final descent, she felt the weight of an invisible pressure bearing down on her. The sharp eyes of Michael Reed, the silence of the Lewis family, and the murmurs of the other passengers had shaken her ability to maintain her usual confident demeanor. As passengers began disembarking, Alice stood at the door, struggling to maintain a professional smile. Michael Reed passed by first, his sharp gaze lingering on her for a brief moment. "I hope you remember what we discussed," he said lightly, but with unmistakable meaning. Alice gave a stiff nod, unsure how to respond. The Lewis family was the last to leave. Daniel stepped up to Alice, his eyes calm but penetrating, as though he could see through her polished exterior to her true self. "Thank you for the flight," he said, his tone polite but carrying clear disappointment. Alice opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel didn't give her the chance. "I hope you take some time to reflect on how you treat passengers," he said, his voice firm. "Experiences like this don't just affect us, they say a lot about who you are." Alice froze, her hands awkwardly fidgeting. I sincerely apologize if I upset your family." Daniel gave a slight nod, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need an apology. I need to see change. Think about that." But the real storm was just beginning. While Alice was tidying up the galley, a colleague approached her with a nervous expression. "Alice, the captain wants to see you in the cockpit immediately." Alice's heart skipped a beat as she set the tray down. "What's this about?" Her colleague shrugged, their face a mixture of unease and sympathy. "I'm not sure, but it's something to do with the notice from management." Alice entered the cockpit, her heart pounding as Captain Henry Clark's stern eyes met hers. Known for his strict but fair leadership, he didn't greet her as usual. Instead, he gestured for her to sit. The atmosphere in the cockpit felt heavy. "Is there an issue, Captain?" Alice asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the unease was evident in her eyes. Captain Clark slowly pulled a file from the control panel, flipping through its pages before looking back at Alice. "We've received an urgent notice from Skylux headquarters," he said, his voice low but direct. Alice straightened in her seat, each word he spoke weighing on her like an impending storm. "What notice, sir?" The captain paused, his gaze shifting from the file to Alice. "The Lewis family, those passengers you served on this flight, are not ordinary passengers," he said, his tone deliberate. "They are the largest shareholders of Skylux Airlines." Alice felt her breath catch as the gravity of his words hit her. She stared at the captain, speechless. Captain Clark continued, his tone steady but pointed. "They boarded this flight not as shareholders but as regular passengers to assess the quality of service Skylux provides. And based on what I've heard, their experience fell far short of expectations." The phrase "largest shareholders" reverberated in Alice's mind like a thunderclap. She stared at the captain, still unable to speak. Her trembling hands gripped the armrests of her chair. At that moment, Daniel Lewis appeared at the cockpit door, making Alice flinch. He entered with an air of calm authority, his sharp gaze locking onto Alice's pale face. "I think it's time you learn the truth," he began, his voice low but commanding. "My family is not just here as passengers. We are the largest shareholders of Skylux Airlines. And today, we evaluated how this airline fulfills its promise to treat all passengers equally, regardless of their status. Alice froze, feeling as if the ground beneath her had crumbled. Her mind raced through every moment of the flight, her cold attitude, her lack of professionalism, and most vividly, the disappointed looks from the Lewis family. Daniel adjusted his suit jacket, standing tall. "We didn't come here to ruin your career, Miss Parker," he said, his tone icy but not devoid of empathy. "However, we must make it clear that your behavior doesn't just hurt my family, it damages the reputation of this airline, a brand that's supposed to represent fairness and respect." Vivian stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "We hoped this flight would reflect Skylux's standards. Unfortunately, it didn't. But you now have an opportunity to reflect on this and make changes, not just for Skylux, but for yourself." Michael Reed, standing nearby, gave a subtle nod but didn't add to the conversation. His presence alone, however, was enough to amplify the weight of the situation. Alice sat frozen, feeling her world crumble. What she had done couldn't be undone, and the consequences were now beyond her control. As they left the cockpit, Alice realized that this was a pivotal moment in her career. It could be an opportunity to change, or the end of everything she had worked for. And it all depended on the decisions of the very people she had underestimated. Alice returned home after the meeting in the VIP lounge, but she knew the matter was far from over. Anxiety clung to her throughout the car ride from the airport, and when she stepped into her small quiet apartment, a sense of emptiness enveloped her. She set her bag down and collapsed onto the sofa, her mind swirling with chaotic thoughts. The next morning, the official notice from Skylux Airlines arrived. The email was brief but cutting, informing her of an immediate suspension pending further investigation into her behavior on the flight. "We will contact you upon the completion of the review." The final line concluded decisively. Alice sat motionless in front of her laptop, her hands trembling. In her 15 years of service, this was the first time she had been suspended, a monumental blow not only to her career but also to her pride. The entire day, Alice could do nothing but sit in silence, her mind replaying the images of the Lewis family during the flight, Vivian's disappointed eyes, Daniel's calm but icy demeanor, and most of all, their cutting words in the VIP lounge. Alice's mistakes reflected the biases rooted in her past. Confronting them, she decided to change, not just to right her wrongs but to become a better person. She recalled her childhood, growing up in a poor neighborhood where her family was often looked down upon. A vivid memory surfaced. At age 12, she had been rejected from a student club because she was deemed unfit. That rejection etched a belief deep into her mind that everything required proof of worth. From then on, she learned to control her emotions, maintaining a cold exterior as a shield against hurt. But that shield had now become a barrier separating her from those around her. The harshness she applied to herself had gradually transformed into judgment toward others. She hadn't realized that she was perpetuating the same kind of prejudice she had once suffered, judging people based on appearances and biases. Alice rose from the sofa and looked into the mirror in her living room. For the first time, she saw a version of herself she didn't like, a woman who had allowed past prejudices and wounds to dictate her present behavior. "I become the person I used to hate," she whispered, her voice so faint she could barely hear it herself. For the first time in years, Alice felt truly small. She knew that change would not come easily, but this awakening, though late, was the first step on the journey she had to take to mend what she had broken. And to do that, Alice knew she had to start by acknowledging her own mistakes. Alice woke up after a restless night. Her dreams were chaotic and filled with images of the Lewis family and the criticisms she faced in the VIP lounge. As the morning light filtered through her curtains, she sat motionless on the sofa, her mind racing with thoughts. She knew that if she didn't act, nothing would ever change. "I can't keep living like this," she thought, the weight of regret pressing heavily on her. She glanced at her phone on the table, hesitated, then finally dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Her brother Liam. Liam worked in inclusive education, regularly conducting workshops on equality and respecting differences. Alice and Liam hadn't been close in recent years, largely because of Alice's strict and often critical attitude toward his choices. But now she knew Liam was the one person who could help her. When the familiar voice on the other end answered, Alice found it hard to speak. "Alice, you're calling me?" Liam's voice was surprised, but not cold. "Yes," Alice replied, trying to steady her voice. Do you have a few minutes? I need to talk to you. There was a brief pause before Liam answered. Go ahead, I'm listening. Alice took a deep breath, feeling her defenses crumbling. I've made a big mistake, Liam. And I need help. I don't know where to start. Liam didn't respond immediately, but when he spoke, his voice was warm and patient. All right, Alice. If you're truly ready to change, I'll help you. But you have to be prepared to face things you might not want to hear. Alice nodded, even though she knew Liam couldn't see her. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, and for the first time in years, her voice carried an unmistakable sincerity. Under Liam's guidance, Alice began her journey of self-improvement. He introduced her to an online course on recognizing and overcoming unconscious bias. At first, Alice felt uncomfortable confronting lessons that revealed how her actions stemmed from deeply rooted biases she had never acknowledged. Each lesson was like a mirror reflecting the mistakes she had made. Alice revisited how she treated the Lewis family, the indifferent glances, the cold attitude, and realized these weren't just minor missteps, but symptoms of a larger issue. In addition to the course, Liam sent Alice a reading list on respecting differences and fostering inclusive work environments. Alice spent hours poring over books, taking notes, and watching online lectures. Stories from speakers, people who had faced discrimination, reshaped her perspective. For the first time, Alice empathized with the pain of others by seeing the world through their eyes. Alice didn't just aim to understand, she began to practice. She joined an online forum where people shared their experiences and discussed ways to break down biases. Initially, she was hesitant to share her story, but the support she received from strangers online gave her confidence. One day, while scrolling through forum posts, Alice came across a story from someone who had experienced workplace discrimination. The heartfelt words gripped her, reminding her of the Lewis family's unspoken disappointment. But this time, instead of feeling defensive, Alice felt profound empathy. It's never too late to change, she reminded herself. Day by day, Alice realized that change wouldn't be easy. However, she understood that confronting her mistakes and seeking to make amends was the first step toward becoming a better person. With Liam's support and her determination, Alice began to rebuild her life, not just to restore her career but to discover a deeper purpose in treating everyone with fairness and respect. She knew the road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, Alice felt hopeful. Alice began to realize that self-reflection and learning were not enough. After completing the course on unconscious bias, she understood that to truly change, she needed to act. Inspired by the touching stories she had read about people who turned personal experiences into catalysts for change, Alice resolved to do the same. With Liam's suggestion, Alice reached out to a nonprofit organization called Equity in the Workplace, which focused on fostering inclusive and respectful work environments. Initially, she hesitated to share her past with the organization's coordinator, but her sincerity and desire for growth were warmly received. Alice was assigned a small role on the organization's logistics team. Her first task was to prepare materials for a workshop on awareness and behavior change in the workplace. Though her role was modest, she felt content contributing in any way she could. During the workshops, Alice quietly observed as speakers shared their stories and experiences. Some stories deeply moved her, especially those from individuals who had faced discrimination yet persevered to advocate for fairness. These moments made Alice realize that her journey of improvement was not just about fixing her mistakes, but also about contributing to a better society. After a few weeks, Alice grew more confident and volunteered to help organize the workshops. She proposed topic ideas and helped develop content, drawing from her own experiences. Gradually, she transitioned from a logistics assistant to a key member of the team, contributing to meaningful programs. At a large workshop event hosted by the organization, Alice unexpectedly ran into Mia, her former colleague from Skylux Airlines. Both were stunned for a moment at the sight of each other. Mia, now working with another organization, maintained a polite but somewhat distant demeanor. Feeling this was an opportunity to amend past mistakes, Alice approached her. "Mia, you might not want to hear this, but I truly want to apologize," Alice said, her eyes earnest. "I wasn't fair to you when we worked together. I know I ignored your concerns about how passengers were treated. I'm deeply sorry." Mia looked at Alice for a moment, seemingly assessing the sincerity of her words. "You've changed," Mia remarked, her tone softer. "I can see that. I'm glad you've taken this path." Alice nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I can't go back and fix everything," she said. "But I hope I can do better moving forward." The two began talking more openly, and it seemed their previously strained relationship had a chance to be rebuilt. Mia even shared insights from her new field of work, making Alice feel less alone in her journey. Alice realized that personal change was not only a process for herself but also an opportunity to help others. She began sharing her story during workshops. For the first time, she stood in front of a group and spoke about her mistakes on that fateful flight, the unconscious bias that hurt others, and her ongoing journey to make amends. Alice's story was not just a confession, but a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing one's mistakes. After her first workshop, a participant approached her and said, "Your story made me realize I need to change how I see things too. Thank you for your courage." Alice smiled, feeling as though she had found a new purpose. Although the road ahead remained long, she knew that each small step carried immense meaning. For the first time in months, Alice felt like she was truly moving forward, not just to improve herself, but to spread the positive value she once overlooked. Alice sat at her small desk in her apartment, the dim light from her desk lamp illuminating the blank pages before her. This wasn't the first time she had tried to write an apology letter to the Lewis family, but each attempt ended with her struggling to find the right words, ones that felt sincere without slipping into justification. She wanted her apology to be clear, fully admitting her mistakes and expressing gratitude for the way they had helped her see herself anew. The letter from Skylux was more than a chance to redeem herself, it was validation that Alice's transformation was creating real value. In the quiet glow of her room, she sat still, filled with a cautious hope. She knew this journey was far from over, but each step reminded her that she had chosen the right path, not just to make amends but to inspire positive change. After some reflection, Alice picked up her pen, took a deep breath, and began to write. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Lewis, ****. I'm writing this letter with deep sincerity and profound regret. I know my behavior on your recent flight was unacceptable and made your family feel unfairly treated. While no apology can erase what happened, I want to express how truly sorry I am. My actions reflected not only a lack of professionalism but also betrayed the values that Skylux Airlines and I should have upheld. Through your feedback, I have realized that not just during this flight but many moments before, I allowed unconscious biases to influence how I treated others. I am grateful to you not only for pointing out my shortcomings but for allowing me to change because of this. Through this reflection, I have embarked on a journey of learning and self-improvement. I hope that one day I can repay your kindness by promoting the values I've learned from your family. Wishing you and your family health and happiness. Sincerely, Alice Parker ****. A few days later, an envelope arrived at Alice's apartment with Vivian Lewis's name on the return address. Her heart raced as she opened the letter, revealing neat, meaningful handwriting. Dear Miss Parker ****. Thank you for your letter. I can sense the sincerity in every word and greatly appreciate your effort to confront your mistakes. As you've realized, change is not something that happens overnight. It requires time, persistence, and above all, courage to continue learning. Your journey is important not just for you but for those you will encounter in the future. One act of change can have a much larger impact than you might imagine. Keep walking this path. Wishing you success and peace. Sincerely, Vivian Lewis ****. Vivian's words felt like a guiding light illuminating the road ahead for Alice. She felt a sense of relief but also recognized that her journey had only just begun. Inspired by the letter, Alice resolved to not only mend her relationship with the Lewis family but also with her loved ones. As she prepared to return to Skylux in a new advisory role, Alice decided to meet Mia to express her gratitude. Though their relationship had been strained, she realized Mia had been instrumental in helping her confront her mistakes even if her approach had been firm. They met at a small cafe. Mia was already seated, her smile gentle but cautious. Alice walked over, nodded in greeting, and sat down. After a few moments of silence, she spoke. Mia, I want to thank you. If it weren't for your report, I might never have realized just how far off course I had gone. Mia looked at Alice for a moment, seemingly assessing the sincerity of her words. At the time, I wasn't thinking about it personally, Mia said. I just felt that if I didn't act, I'd be complicit in the problem. But seeing you now, I can tell you've truly changed. That makes me proud. Alice felt warmth from Mia's words. She smiled, this time without any defensiveness or hesitation. I want you to know that I'm trying not just to make up for my mistakes but to do what's right moving forward. And if you don't mind, I'd love for us to work together on the new training program. Mia raised her eyebrows in surprise. You want me to work with you? Alice shook her head. No, you're the person who taught me the biggest lesson of my career, and I think Skylux needs people like you, people who stand up for the airline's core values. Mia smiled, her expression full of emotion. If that's what you need, I'll stand with you. The meeting ended with a meaningful handshake. For the first time, Alice felt she wasn't alone on this new journey. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived at Alice's address from Skylux Airlines headquarters. Holding the letter, the familiar pang of anxiety resurfaced, but as she opened it and read the neatly typed invitation, she was completely taken aback. Dear Ms. Alice Parker, after reviewing your work history and your journey of self-improvement, we believe your story can bring significant value to Skylux. We are honored to invite you to join our new employee training program as an advisor. Your role will be to share your personal experiences and assist in developing policies that prevent similar mistakes in the future. We hope you will accept this invitation as an opportunity to continue your path of change and contribute to making Skylux not just a renowned airline for its services, but also its human values. Sincerely, Vivian Lewis. Alice held the letter, her eyes pausing on the italicized line. At the recommendation of the Lewis family, we've decided to invite you back as an advisor in the new employee training program. She could hardly believe her eyes. The Lewis family, though she had once treated unfairly, had written a recommendation advocating for her chance. This was beyond anything she had expected. She turned over the letter, and a small card from Daniel and Vivian Lewis fell out. Alice. Mistakes do not define who you are. How you face them and correct them does. We believe you can inspire positive change, not just for Skylux, but for everyone around you. Wishing you success on your new journey. Sincerely, Daniel and Vivian Lewis. Alice felt her vision blur with tears. The grace and generosity of the Lewis family illuminated the darkest corners of her soul, and she knew she couldn't let them down. Alice began by calling her mother, with whom she had grown distant because of her critical nature. Their initial conversations were awkward, but over time, the two began to understand each other better. Alice also reconnected with old friends she had distanced herself from due to her unrealistic standards. One afternoon, she invited Liam for coffee to thank him for not giving up on her when she reached out. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known where to start, she said, her voice trembling. You did it yourself, Liam replied, his eyes full of pride. Not everyone dares to face themselves the way you have. Alice also dedicated more time to the nonprofit organization she was involved with. She volunteered to help organize a workshop specifically for businesses looking to build inclusive work environments. During the workshop, Alice stood in front of a small group of attendees and shared her story. Her words weren't just about failure, they were about learning and hope. With each passing day, Alice felt as though she was being reborn. No longer the cold, judgmental woman she once was, she was becoming someone new, a person willing to listen, learn, and change. Vivian's letter was a constant reminder that change is a long journey, but Alice knew she was on the right path. Alice never imagined she would one day stand before a crowded auditorium, bright lights shining down on her, sharing her personal story with hundreds of people. But today, there she was, exuding confidence and speaking with a voice full of passion. Her transformation, from a flight attendant once suspended from duty to an inspirational speaker on equity and inclusion, marked a major turning point in her life. Hello, everyone, Alice began, her voice resonating clearly through the hall. I'm Alice Parker, and I'm here today not as someone perfect, but as someone who has made mistakes, faced those mistakes, and is working to be better every day. She paused briefly, scanning the attentive faces in the audience. She recounted her journey from the fateful flight, where her unconscious biases influenced how she treated passengers, to the moment she had to confront the consequences of her actions. I used to think of myself as a professional, someone whose standards for myself and others were beyond reproach. But the truth is, I used those standards to justify my biases and favoritism. And that's when I realized if I didn't change, I would always remain part of the problem. Alice continued by explaining her path to transformation, not just learning about unconscious bias, but actively practicing empathy and respect. She spoke of the initial difficulties in facing herself and recognizing that her wrongful actions were not fleeting moments but symptoms of a deeper issue. Change isn't easy, she said, her voice tinged with emotion. It requires peeling back the protective layers, confronting the parts of yourself you've tried to hide, and most importantly, learning to take responsibility without making excuses. Alice shared the significant moments of her journey, reconnecting with her brother Liam, organizing workshops, and receiving an encouraging letter from Vivian Lewis. They didn't just help me see my mistakes, she said, her voice filled with gratitude, they showed me that change is entirely possible if you're willing to put in the effort. In the closing part of her speech, Alice emphasized that her story was not one of redemption, but one of learning and growth. We all have the opportunity to do better, she said, her tone resolute, but that opportunity only comes when we're brave enough to confront the truth about ourselves. She concluded, and I hope my story helps you realize that change isn't just necessary, it's worth it. The auditorium erupted into applause as Alice finished her speech. She stepped off the stage, her heart pounding. A few people from the audience approached her to thank her and share their feelings. A young woman said, "Your story made me reflect on myself and realize that I need to change too." From someone once trapped by prejudice, Alice had become a symbol of positive change. The lessons from her journey not only helped her become a better person but also inspired many others. She was no longer the rigid, judgmental woman she used to be, but someone who listened, empathized, and offered support. Alice knew she still had much to learn, but she wasn't afraid. With every workshop and conversation, she felt closer to building a meaningful life, not just for herself but for those around her. And with every story she told, old Alice understood that her transformation was truly making a difference. Alice stood backstage, where the glow of the stage lights still cast their brilliance. The sound of applause echoed in the air, affirming that her story had touched many hearts. She glanced at the mirror in front of her and saw a reflection of herself, not the rigid, cold woman she once was, but someone new, filled with empathy and determination. Vivian Lewis's question from their meeting in the VIP lounge resurfaced in her mind. What have you learned after 15 years? Alice closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had spent many restless nights pondering this question, but now, standing at the threshold of a new chapter in her life, she had found her answer. She murmured to herself, as if affirming it for her own heart. I've learned that humility is the foundation of all change. I've learned that taking responsibility means not just facing mistakes, but fixing them. And most importantly, I've learned that mistakes do not define us. How we grow from them does. These words resonated within Alice like a solemn vow. She realized that change doesn't come from avoidance but from confronting and rectifying one's flaws. Each day was an opportunity to do better, understand more deeply, and connect more genuinely with others. Alice stepped out of the auditorium, her gaze steady. She knew this journey wouldn't be easy, but every step was a chance to make amends and build a better future. For the first time, she was ready to face the world without fear. The afternoon light filtered through the large glass windows, casting warm rays along the wide corridors. She paused for a moment, looking out at the clear blue sky, as if listening to her own heart. In that quiet moment, a phrase from Vivian Lewis echoed in her mind, your journey isn't just important for you. It's important for those you'll meet in the future. Alice smiled a gentle but meaningful smile. She understood that every mistake, every turning point, every encounter had been a stepping stone that led her to this moment. And more than ever, she knew she was ready to move forward. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Skylux Airlines. The subject line read, New Employee Training Program Towards Equity and Inclusion. Below was a personal message from Vivian Lewis. Alice, I trust that you will use your experiences to help others see the true value of respect and equity. Never stop learning, and remember that you're not just representing yourself, but also the better world we are working together to build. Asterisk. Alice read the message, feeling as if an entirely new world was unfolding before her. She closed her phone, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the building. Ahead lay warm sunlight and unexplored paths. She walked to the edge of the stage, her eyes lingering on the now empty rows of seats. A fleeting smile crossed her face, not for the applause, but for knowing that her journey had only just begun. Her story wouldn't end with speeches or workshops. This was merely the beginning, the start of a new life where she could use her experiences and lessons to help others and spread positive change. Alice left the stage and stepped outside, where the soft afternoon light filtered through the trees. She pulled out her phone and sent a simple but meaningful message to her brother Liam. "Thank you. Without you, I would never have found this path." Asterisk. Liam replied almost instantly. "Don't thank me. You took the steps yourself. I just helped you see the way." Asterisk. Alice smiled, tucking her phone back into her pocket. She walked on, no longer weighed down by the past but instead feeling a sense of lightness and hope. Alice left the cafe, the evening sun streaming through the leaves and onto the street. She lifted her head and gazed at the clear blue sky. At that moment, Alice understood that every day was an opportunity to start anew. With gratitude and determination, she was ready to continue her journey of change. She smiled, not just for the journey she had traversed but for the road ahead, still wide open. Alice knew she would never be perfect, but she could move forward with sincerity and an unwavering commitment to growth. As Alice crossed the street, she noticed a young boy riding his bike slowly alongside his mother. The sight brought a sense of calm and hope to her, feelings she had often overlooked in the rush of her past life. She murmured to herself, "Every day is a gift, and I can't let it pass by without meaning." Her steps grew steadier, as if carrying the weight of lessons learned and the resolved change she had made. Though the journey ahead was still long, Alice felt grateful for the second chances and opportunities that had allowed her to become a better version of herself. In a world full of challenges and struggles, Alice had discovered a new purpose, not just to live in redemption for past mistakes but to spread the positive values she had come to understand. Alice's story doesn't end here. This is only the first chapter in a long journey where she will continue to learn, grow, and bring about change, not just for herself, but for those she encounters along the way. Her story reminds us that mistakes don't define who we are. How we rise and transform in their aftermath is what truly matters. Alright, let's continue Alice's journey from where we left off, building on her growth and exploring the impact of her transformation. As Alice settled into her new advisory role at Skylux Airlines, she knew that her journey was far from over. The lessons she had learned about unconscious bias, empathy, and respect were no longer just theories or distant ideals, they had become the foundation of her everyday interactions. She was determined to make a lasting change, not only in her life but within the airline, a company that had shaped so much of her career. Her first task as an advisor was to help revamp the airline's employee training program. Alice's insights into unconscious bias became a central focus, and she worked closely with management to incorporate real-world examples and activities that encouraged self-reflection among the staff. The training was no longer just about delivering customer service, it was about creating an environment where every passenger, regardless of their background or appearance, could feel valued. One day, Alice found herself in a meeting with the Skylux leadership team. The conference room was filled with senior managers and executives, all discussing the future of the airline. Alice sat at the table, her nerves tingling as she prepared to present her recommendations. The faces around the table were familiar, but her role had shifted. No longer the quiet, distant flight attendant, Alice was now part of the decision-making process. Her presentation was met with attentive silence as she outlined the need for a comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative. She spoke passionately about her own experiences, the mistakes she had made, the biases she had confronted, and the changes she had embraced. Her honesty and vulnerability were powerful. For the first time, she saw the executives nodding in agreement, their usual stoic expressions replaced with genuine interest. After the meeting, Vivian Lewis approached her. "Alice," she said, her voice warm but firm, "your insights are exactly what Skylux needs." You're not just making changes within the airline, you're setting an example for how we can approach our passengers, our colleagues, and ourselves with respect. Alice smiled, humbled by Vivian's praise. Thank you, Vivian. It means more than I can say. I've learned so much, but I still have a long way to go. Vivian nodded. We all do. But we're better off walking this path together. Keep pushing forward. The months that followed were transformative. Alice found herself deeply involved in reshaping Skylux's corporate culture, working with HR, training teams, and flight crews to implement the new policies. It wasn't easy, there were setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But Alice knew that real change was a process, not an event. Every day, she put her beliefs into practice. One of the biggest challenges came during a meeting with senior management when a disagreement arose over a policy Alice had proposed. She wanted to make sure that the airline didn't just offer diversity training but actively fostered an inclusive environment for employees at every level. Some executives questioned whether the focus on inclusion would take away from customer satisfaction or affect profitability. Alice, calm but determined, stood her ground. Inclusion isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. When our employees feel valued and respected, it reflects in how they treat our customers. We've seen the data companies that prioritize inclusivity outperform those that don't. But more importantly, it's about doing what's right, not just what's profitable. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, to Alice's relief, the CEO nodded thoughtfully. I agree with you, Alice. Let's move forward with this. We'll make inclusion a top priority. That victory wasn't just Alice's, it was a win for everyone who had been advocating for change within Skylux, and it was a reminder that sometimes, standing up for what's right meant making difficult choices. Outside of work, Alice also began to repair her personal relationships. She reached out to her mother, who had been distant for years. Their conversations, once strained, began to flow more easily as Alice shared her journey. She admitted the mistakes she had made, and her mother, though initially hesitant, listened with an open heart. I didn't always understand you, Alice, her mother told her one evening, but now, I can see you're becoming the person I always hoped you would be. Tears welled up in Alice's eyes. I didn't make it easy on you, Mom. I'm sorry for that. I'm trying to do better, every day. Her mother hugged her, and for the first time in years, Alice felt a deep sense of connection and understanding with her. But it wasn't just her family that Alice began to reconnect with. She also started reaching out to old colleagues, including Mia. Their relationship, once strained, was now one of mutual respect. Alice invited Mia to lunch, eager to express her gratitude for Mia's role in her transformation. Mia, I can't thank you enough for everything you did, for speaking up when you did, for pushing me to see the truth, Alice said. I know I wasn't easy to work with, but I'm grateful that you didn't give up on me. Mia smiled, her eyes warm. I never gave up on you, Alice. I just knew you had the potential to be better. And I'm proud of you for making it happen. The two talked for hours, reminiscing about their days at Skylux and discussing the changes Alice was now helping to implement. Mia, though no longer with Skylux, had also moved on to a new career path, and she shared her experiences with Alice. Both women had grown, and their newfound friendship was a testament to the power of personal change. As Alice's role within Skylux continued to evolve, she began to gain recognition not just within the company but from the broader business world. Her work on diversity and inclusion caught the attention of industry leaders, and she was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her journey and the lessons she had learned. Each time she took the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her story was helping others understand the importance of empathy and change. But Alice's transformation wasn't just about her work or her career. It was about her becoming the person she had always wanted to be. She no longer felt trapped by her past mistakes. Instead, she saw them as opportunities for growth, each one adding to the person she had become. One day, as Alice walked through the bustling airport terminal, she passed a family of two young children and their parents. They were waiting in the same first-class section where Alice had once made her fateful decisions. She felt a pang of guilt, but instead of retreating into her old self, she smiled warmly at them. The family looked up and smiled back, and in that brief moment, Alice knew she was on the right path. The road ahead would be long, filled with both challenges and victories. But Alice had learned that the journey of change was never easy. It was a constant process of learning, reflecting, and evolving. And she was ready to continue it, one day at a time. As Alice continued her journey of growth and transformation, she began to reflect more deeply on the broader impact her work could have, not just within Skylux Airlines but in the corporate world at large. She had learned the power of humility, empathy, and self-awareness, and now she was ready to take these lessons beyond the confines of her job. Alice's new role as an advisor to Skylux's employee training program was only the beginning of a much larger mission. Her passion for diversity, inclusion, and equity became the driving force behind her every action. She wasn't just interested in changing the airline industry, she wanted to create a ripple effect that would spread through businesses and communities everywhere. One evening, as Alice sat at her desk, poring over the training materials for the next Skylux seminar, she received a call from Liam. "Alice," his voice came through the phone, warm as always, "there's an opportunity one think you should consider." She smiled. Liam had always been her anchor, especially when she needed a push in the right direction. "What kind of opportunity?" Alice asked, intrigued. "There's a nonprofit I'm involved with, one that focuses on fostering workplace inclusion and helping companies develop anti-discrimination policies. They're looking for someone with real-world experience to be part of their advisory board. And I think you'd be perfect for it." Alice felt a surge of excitement. She'd always wanted to extend her impact beyond Skylux, but the idea of joining an organization with a broader scope, one that could influence change across multiple industries, was a dream come true. "That sounds incredible," Alice replied. "I've been thinking more about how I can help others learn from my mistakes. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to take on something like that." Liam's voice was calm and reassuring. "Alice, you've already been doing this for months. You've learned, you've grown, and now you have the chance to help others do the same. You've already proven you can make a difference." After a moment of silence, Alice finally spoke, her heart swelling with determination. "You're right. I'm ready." And so, Alice joined the nonprofit, becoming an official member of its advisory board. It was a significant step in her personal and professional life, one that solidified her commitment to using her experience to help create more inclusive workplaces. She started attending meetings, where she worked alongside other like-minded professionals who were equally passionate about fighting discrimination and supporting diversity. The work was challenging but incredibly rewarding. In addition to her role with the nonprofit, Alice's reputation continued to grow in the corporate world. She was asked to speak at various events, conferences, and workshops, where she shared her story and the lessons she had learned. More and more people started to recognize her not just as a former flight attendant but as a leader in the movement for workplace equity and inclusion. During one of these conferences, Alice found herself standing on a stage in front of hundreds of attendees. The lights were bright, and the buzz of the crowd was palpable, but this time, Alice wasn't nervous. She had grown used to this feeling, knowing that her words had the power to inspire. She looked out at the audience, took a deep breath, and began her speech. "Change is never easy," Alice began, her voice steady and confident, "but it's necessary. I used to think I had everything figured out. I thought I understood the world and how it worked. But I was wrong. I didn't see the biases I was carrying, the prejudices I was perpetuating, and the harm I was causing without even realizing it." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in the room. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "It wasn't until I had to face the consequences of my actions, when I was forced to confront the truth, that I understood how deeply rooted bias can affect us all. But change is possible. It starts with humility, with being open to seeing our own flaws, and with making the conscious choice to be better. We all have a responsibility to change, not just for ourselves, but for the communities we serve." Alice's speech resonated deeply with the audience. Afterward, several attendees came up to her, expressing how her story had made them reflect on their own biases and inspired them to take action. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she realized that her story was not just about her redemption but about sparking change in others. As time went on, Alice's role at Skylux expanded. She was asked to contribute to the company's broader diversity and inclusion strategy, advising leadership on how to make Skylux a leader in workplace equity. It was a daunting task, but Alice approached it with the same dedication and passion that had driven her transformation. She knew it would take time, but she was committed to creating an environment where every employee felt valued and respected. Her personal life also began to flourish. Alice's relationship with her mother grew stronger, and they began spending more time together, sharing stories and supporting each other in ways they hadn't before. Alice also started rebuilding connections with friends she had once pushed away, making amends and fostering deeper, more authentic relationships. One of the most meaningful moments of her personal growth came when Alice attended a reunion with her old classmates from high school. She had avoided many of them over the years, feeling ashamed of her past and the mistakes she had made. But now, she was ready to face them. At the reunion, Alice was surprised to find that her old classmates didn't judge her. In fact, many of them admired her for the changes she had made and the work she was doing. They could see the growth in her, just as Alice had seen it in herself. After the event, Alice received a message from one of her old friends, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. "I'm proud of you, Alice," the message read. "You've become someone I never thought you could be. Keep doing what you're doing. You're an inspiration." Alice smiled as she read the message. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had truly become the person she had always wanted to be. Alice's journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, moments of self-doubt to overcome, and lessons to learn. But she knew she was on the right path. She had embraced her mistakes, learned from them, and had begun to make a real difference in the world. The future was wide open, and Alice was ready to face it head-on, with empathy, humility, and the unwavering belief that change, though difficult, was always worth pursuing. Her story had come full circle, from a flight attendant who faced her biases and made amends, to a powerful advocate for inclusion, diversity, and workplace equity. But Alice knew that every day was a new opportunity to grow, and she was determined to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As Alice's work began to gain traction and her personal transformation continued to unfold, she was invited to participate in an international forum on workplace equality. The forum brought together leaders from various industries, each eager to discuss strategies for building more inclusive, respectful workplaces. Alice saw it as the perfect opportunity to broaden her influence and learn from others who were leading similar efforts. On the first day of the forum, Alice found herself among a group of executives, activists, and thought leaders. There was an energy in the room, a palpable sense of urgency to make a difference in the world. As she listened to others speak about the challenges they faced and the progress they had made, Alice was reminded of how much she had learned over the past year and how far she still had to go. The panel discussions were intense, covering everything from anti-discrimination policies to the importance of representation in leadership. Alice's role was clear: she was to share her story, providing a real-world example of the journey from bias to transformation. But she also wanted to do more than just tell her story; she wanted to be part of the solution. She believed that the work she had done with Skylux Airlines could be a model for other organizations seeking to make genuine, long-term change. When it was Alice's turn to speak, she stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. But instead of the nerves she had once felt, there was only a quiet confidence. She had already walked this path, faced the mistakes, learned the lessons, and now, she was ready to share her message with a larger audience. "Good afternoon," Alice began, her voice calm and steady. "I'm Alice Parker, and just a few years ago, I was a flight attendant at Skylux Airlines, convinced that I understood the world and how it worked. I believed that some passengers were deserving of better treatment than others simply because of how they looked, how they spoke, or how they dressed." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I was wrong." She shared her story, detailing the turning point in her life, the moment when she realized her unconscious biases had caused real harm. She spoke of the Lewis family, how their quiet dignity in the face of her mistreatment had forced her to confront her own prejudices and ultimately change the course of her life. Alice described the steps she took to make amends, from completing a course on unconscious bias to working on creating inclusive environments within Skylux and beyond. The room was silent as Alice spoke, her words resonating deeply with the audience. As she concluded her speech, she looked out at the group of professionals and activists, feeling more connected to them than ever before. She realized that this journey of change was not hers alone, it was a collective effort, one that involved all of them working together to create a better future. When we create inclusive environments, Alice said, we don't just improve our workplaces. We change lives. We show people that they matter. And when we open ourselves up to the possibility of change, we become better not just for the people around us, but for ourselves. I'm still on that journey. Every day, I'm learning and growing. And I hope you all will take the same journey with me. The applause that followed wasn't just for Alice's speech, it was for the movement that was starting to take shape. A movement built on empathy, humility, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. After the forum, Alice received several messages from attendees, expressing their gratitude for her words and asking for advice on how to implement similar changes in their own companies. Many were inspired to take action, to introduce unconscious bias training or to start fostering more inclusive practices within their teams. Alice felt a sense of pride, knowing that her story had sparked something in others, just as the Lewis family's grace had sparked change in her. The experience at the forum also solidified Alice's belief in the power of vulnerability. In sharing her mistakes, she had not only gained the trust and respect of others but had also made herself a part of a larger community of people who were committed to making the world a more just place. She knew that she could not do it alone, but together, they could create real change. Back at Skylux, the changes Alice had been advocating for were beginning to take root. The new diversity and inclusion training program was being rolled out company-wide, and Alice was asked to lead a series of workshops for employees at all levels. These workshops were designed not just to educate but to engage employees in meaningful conversations about bias, equity, and the importance of creating an environment where everyone could thrive. One day, Alice found herself leading a workshop with a group of new hires. The room was filled with young, eager faces, and Alice could sense their excitement to start their careers at Skylux. As she spoke to them about the importance of inclusion, she noticed a few of them nodding along, clearly moved by the message. "Alice, how did you become so open to all of this?" one of the new hires asked. "I mean, how did you know you needed to change?" Alice smiled softly. "It wasn't easy," she said. "I had to look at myself in a way I didn't want to. But the truth is, change doesn't come from avoiding the hard things, it comes from facing them head-on. I didn't want to admit that I had been part of the problem, but once I did, I realized I had the power to make things right. And you all have that same power now." The room grew quiet as the new hires absorbed her words. Alice could see the wheels turning in their minds, and she felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, these young professionals would never have to face the same biases she had once perpetuated. As Alice looked around the room, she realized that her journey wasn't just about fixing the past, it was about shaping the future. And in that moment, she knew she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. But Alice's story wasn't over. The work she had started with Skylux and the nonprofit had only just begun to ripple out into the world. She was invited to collaborate with other companies, to share her approach to diversity and inclusion, and to offer her expertise on creating policies that foster respect and fairness. Her life had taken an unexpected turn, from a flight attendant struggling with her own biases to a respected leader in the movement for equality. And though the journey ahead was still long, Alice knew that she had become part of something much bigger than herself, a force for change that would continue to spread, influencing workplaces, communities, and individuals for years to come. Every day, Alice faced new challenges. But each challenge was an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others. And with every step, Alice became more certain of one thing: the journey of transformation was endless, and it was worth every moment. As Alice's influence within Skylux Airlines and the nonprofit grew, she began to notice something remarkable. The more she advocated for change, the more the people around her started to shift as well. It was as if the ripples of her transformation had begun to touch others, encouraging them to reflect, to grow, and to challenge their own biases. Alice saw the effects of her work not only in the policies that were changing within Skylux but also in the conversations happening in break rooms, boardrooms, and throughout the airline's vast network. One afternoon, Alice sat in a meeting with the senior leadership team at Skylux. They were discussing the next phase of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, and the atmosphere in the room was different from when she had first started. There was a genuine openness among the team to explore new ideas, to take risks, and to push for real, lasting change. "Alice, we've seen the impact of your work on the culture here," said the CEO, a man who had been skeptical of the program in the beginning. "The feedback from employees has been overwhelmingly positive. We've started to see a shift in how people interact with one another, how they approach challenges, and how they view their roles in the company. But we need to take it a step further. We want to launch a company-wide mentorship program to support underrepresented employees. What do you think?" Alice felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about changing attitudes anymore, it was about creating structural change, something that would leave a lasting legacy. "I think it's an excellent idea," Alice replied. Mentorship can make a huge difference in fostering inclusion. It's not just about providing guidance for those who need it, but also about creating connections that break down barriers. By pairing employees from different backgrounds and departments, we can build a culture of mutual respect and understanding. This will be a vital step in making Skylux not only an inclusive company but also a company where everyone feels empowered to succeed. The leadership team nodded, clearly on board with the idea. Over the next few months, Alice worked closely with HR and other departments to design the mentorship program, ensuring it would be inclusive, effective, and sustainable. It wasn't long before Skylux Airlines launched the program, and Alice was invited to lead the first group of mentors and ments. The success of the mentorship initiative was remarkable. Employees who had once felt isolated began to form strong, supportive relationships with colleagues from different backgrounds. The initiative fostered an environment where people felt safe to share their experiences, where they could learn from one another, and where they were given the tools to succeed. As the program flourished, Alice found herself working more closely with the company's leadership to ensure the mentorship model was integrated into Skylux's long-term business strategy. But even as Alice's professional life was reaching new heights, her personal life continued to evolve as well. She had built stronger bonds with her family, particularly her mother, who had become one of her biggest supporters. Their relationship had grown into one of mutual understanding and respect, and Alice had come to appreciate her mother in a way she never had before. One day, while they were having tea together, Alice's mother looked at her with a mixture of pride and reflection. "You've really come a long way, Alice," her mother said softly. "I've watched you grow, and I see the woman you are now, the one I always knew was in there. I'm proud of the person you've become." Alice smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had never thought this day would come. "Thank you, Mom. I'm proud of the woman I'm becoming, too. But I wouldn't be here without you." Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "I've always been here, Alice. You just had to be willing to see it." With each passing day, Alice found herself not only accepting the love and support of those around her but also extending that same kindness to others. She became more involved in community outreach, working with organizations that supported underprivileged youth, women, and minorities. She spoke at schools, sharing her story with young people who were struggling with the same biases she had once carried, showing them that change was possible, no matter their background or circumstances. In one particular school visit, Alice was invited to speak to a group of high school seniors who were about to graduate. She shared her story, how she had once been closed off to the world, unable to see beyond her own prejudices, and how she had learned to challenge those beliefs and grow. As she spoke, she saw the faces of the students light up. Some were nodding in understanding, while others were completely captivated by her words. One student, a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, stood up after the talk and walked up to Alice. "Thank you so much for sharing your story," she said. "It made me realize that I don't have to keep making the same mistakes I've made. I can choose to change, too."